Okay, so generally with, I shouldn't have chucked the mousey in the general direction of the cat. No, I've got a dancing cat. So generally with low spines, we can go to the next spine to help to sort that out. So if we let the nose come back through into the back of the head, if we let the eyes come back through into the back of the head and let the jaw rest back, and just feel that broadness in the back of the skull. Let the ears become nice and heavy. And we just start to rest the weight of the head. We don't rest the weight of the head enough, really, because, you know, obviously it's at the top of the spine and tends to be quite a lot of work for the spine to hold it up there. So we just take the opportunity for the facial features to rest. We can smooth out the forehead. We can let the cheeks soften, you know, have a feel around the back of the jaw, sort of that TMJ area. It's all fascially connected down into the low spine. So, you know, what's happening in the back teeth, what's happening in the tongue, and can we just start to cause an element of relaxation there? Can we really feel that we've got a little bit of weight? You know, the jaw and the tongue are heavy, so can we let those just really sort of soften back? The eyes, of course, are fluid, so again, there is a weight to them. So can we just let everything just, that's a technical term, just sink back into the back of the head, and this broad smile that we talk about on the back of the ribs so much, but this broad smile on the back of the head can start to open up and soften. Vanda talked a lot about sort of letting the back of the brain soften and separate. She had some theories around, you know, tensioning at the brow and tension in the pelvis, pulling the back part of the brain together and you know, causing it to run a bit more slowly than was useful. So can we allow the back of the brain, if we just imagine that, just a broadening and a softening there. And it just lets the head reposition itself, what would be back into the gravity line if we were standing, but just back onto the top of the spine. And then we feel that the neck starts to soften, maybe the front of the neck and the voice box, that sort of area, can we let that just soften back? If it's nice to take the thumbs behind the ears and under the bubbly bits of the skull, you can just smooth round the underside of the skull. It might be a little bit tense there, particularly if you are experiencing sort of low spine issues, or you've got tension in your lower back. If you've been doing something this week that's caused a bit of tension there, then we can just go and we can just make little circly movements into the underside of the skull. And the movement of the thumbs is in, you know, from the ears, we want to sweep in under the skull towards the center part of the skull. And then if it's nice to draw the back of the head away towards the top of your mat, and it's very gentle, it's a very, there's a micro movement if you like, but it's just introducing a little bit of length that pulls the tongue back into its root, that pulls the voice box back into its root. If we keep going here, for those of you that are a little bit further along in your journey, if we keep smoothing and lengthening here, you might feel that through the vertebrae down as far as between the shoulder blades and in behind the heart and the lungs. And again, you know, we tend to be very forward facing because the eyes are there. So can we let the front of the ribs soften back? Can we let the diaphragm, the underside of the ribs, the heart and the lungs just get drawn back and up and in and back into the underside of the shoulders where they belong? If we've been upright for long periods of time, sitting at the desk or standing, that sort of stuff, then, you know, we are drawn down by gravity. So just letting everything float back into where it should be. So the heart and the lungs sort of go in and up, and then the solar plexus softens back. So we might start to feel that the front of the tummy starts to hollow out a little bit, and the organs, the viscera of the abdomen, and, you know, the intestines, the guts of the matter, all start to get drawn back towards the spine. And this starts to give us space into the low spine and a relaxation into the low spine. This all happens by, you know, messing around with the head. So it might be nice at some point just to bring the hands onto the front of the ribs, pointy parts of the front of the ribs, and just using the heels of the hands, we can just smooth the ribs back towards the spine. We might smooth the front of the ribs down towards the tummy, and just start to soften the front of the chest back. And when we do that again, that gives us some space into the neck. Can we feel that there's a ripple effect that happens from the back of the ribs outwards, upwards, through the neck and into the crown of the head? But also there's a ripple effect that starts to happen as the solar plexus drops back, as T12, the very center of the spine, drops back. T12 is the divide between the base of the ribs and the top of the lumbars. Can we feel that then the low spine can ripple out long into the back part of the pelvis, the sacrum? Can we do that? And you might find that one rib is higher than the other, or one side of the ribs is higher than the other. So just working with that and noticing how that will shift the shoulder blades. Shoulder blades start to present to the ground. You know, maybe we can make both sides flat on the ground. The collarbones feel like they can slide off the edges of the shoulders. Tend to hold a little bit of tension there as well. And when we've got shoulder blades that are a bit high on the body, that can pull the low spine, cause load to the low spine. So we're looking to let the shoulder blades descend a little bit down the back of the body, and then the top part of the shoulder blade starts to look towards the ground. So there might be a little bit of jiggery pokery going on in there. So just let muscles relax. If you can feel them holding on for dear life, then let those relax and release. You might find that there's muscles in there that have got a little bit short, or there's muscles in there that just need a little bit of attention, just need a little bit of TLC. We start to feel that the sacrum, the drawbridge of the sacrum and the back of the pelvis can just roll away towards the heels. Find that the sit bones can just get pulled down into the ground. So the back of the hips start to present. We tend to pull ourselves round towards the front. So can we let the long leg bones go back into the sockets? And the sockets are on the side of the hips. So can we feel that there's a broadness on the back of the hips? So we might find that the breath starts to come in a little bit deeper. And then the soles of the feet might start to stretch out. So between heels and toes. Can we just lift the wiggly parts of the toes up and just let the balls of the feet extend away and extend broad. And just start to reconnect to the ground. So just bringing the pointy parts of the elbows down to the ground either side of the body. We want the weight of the forearms and the hands coming down through the pointy parts of the elbows. They're a nice interface for the long arm bone, which gets drawn back through the shoulders to the spine. And they give a broadness to the chest. So can we just feel that the feet get pulled down into the ground? We start to just feel that we can pull the long little toe side of the left foot and the big toe joint and the inside of the heel on the right foot down into the ground. This will take the knees over to the side, but we're keeping the sit bones pulled down into the ground. So you'll feel this in your center tummy muscles, and if you have got hitches and glitches in the low spine, it's not a big movement, it's just a little rock to one side, and then the feet pull back into the ground, and we'll go all the way through, and the feet long little toe side on the right side, and the left big toe joint and the inside of the heel get pulled down into the ground. And we can go in the other direction. So it's almost like a rocking motion from one side to the other rather than, you know, this full laying twist that we can throw ourselves into. Particularly for those of us that are very flexible and we've got range. A lot of the time we can just flop the legs over, but actually do we want that? So with the big toe joint that's pulling down into the ground, if we pull that down into the ground and get a nice stretch on the front of the quad, so you might find that the front of the thigh is a little bit caught up. Quads tend to overwork if the low spine is a bit grumpy. So do we need a little bit of a stretch out there, stretch into the front of the hip perhaps? Again, have your hands around the ribs. If that feels nice, we can smooth the ribs back towards the spine. And it's the pull of the heel into the ground that brings the knees back to center. Let that roll, that broadness happen through the back of the pelvis, and we can come out to the other side. So it's exploring movement, exploratory movement. Just notice where the pockets of tension are for you, maybe in the front of the hip, like I say, maybe in the tummy, but just letting the body respond. Maybe that as the shoulders broaden and start to connect to the ground, we get a length through the upper part of the spine, and the head might start to look in the opposite direction to the legs, because there's an unfurling that happens here. Can we get a little bit more space in the ribs? So there are times when the low spine gets into distress, but actually, and calls for our attention, but actually the culprit for that, not that we want to blame anybody, but the root of that may be sitting up in the ribs. So can we feel that there's more of a broadness to the ribs? Can we feed the arms back through the shoulders into the spine? Can we make space between each individual rib? So the next time we come back to the centre, we're just going to have the hands onto the front of the hips, and we're just going to pull down through the long little toe side of the right side and just let the knee go out to the side. Again, it's not a big movement. We want to keep the leg feeding back through the socket into the low spine. Can we feel that anchorage at the base of the back of the ribs? And the big toe joint in the inside of the heel, just pulling the knee back to the centre. And then coming out on the other side. So again, we're looking for that nice heaviness through the back of the pelvis, that nice heaviness through the back of the ribs. All feeds into the low spine to give it that appropriate spacing and that appropriate support. And just changing over sides in your own time. So just exploring your movement. How far does the knee come out to the side before the back of the pelvis has to start getting involved, before the leg starts pulling around on the ball and socket joint and starts affecting the back of the pelvis? And one side might be quite different to the other. Which is why we've got the hands on the front of the hip bones and the front of the tummy, just to monitor what's going on in there. We want to be feeling that the muscles on the inside of the pelvis that line the inside of the hip bones are working, so you should feel that under your hands. So just having once more on each side. And just coming back to the centre when you're ready. And then just allowing the knees to come in towards the tummy. Or give the knees a bit of a hug. We don't want to close the joints on the front of the hips. So just leave a space there. Leave the drawbridge of the sacrum rolling away. Leave the sit bones heavy. So we're not rolling the back of the pelvis in towards us. So we just want to feel that the kind of the back of the pelvis, where the connections of the leg to the pelvis, they can stretch out rather than it always being through the low spine. And we're going to come over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. And we're going to find our way into our square pose. So take your time. And we're just having hands underneath the knees, that's contortionism. Knees underneath the hips. Yes, Ronnie, you have to come out of cat prison at some point. She's not giving up, is she? So, knees underneath the hips and hands underneath the shoulders. Just starting to arrange ourselves in that way. Oh, there it is, okay. So we're just finding the tops of the feet initially. We feel like someone's got hold of the big toes and they're just pulling the big toes away towards the wall behind you. So rather than pushing the feet into the ground, we don't want to do that because it gives us cramp. It's not useful. we just start to feel that as the front of the ankle gets pulled open, we can take the sit bones back a little bit so that the weight is coming down through the shins. And we start to get that nice length into the shins. And just feeling that the tissues can soften here. It's an interesting one because we can use the body weight to our advantage. We tend to have a little bit, caught up in the front of the shin, front of the ankle there. So can we just let that relax and soften? And then just starting to bring the breath into the ribs. So we've got that broad smile on the back of the ribs, got a broad smile on the back of the head. And can we just soften through the elbows so the pointy parts of the elbows start to look back towards the thighs. And that starts to bring us back into the spine again. We've got legs that can feed through the hips into the low spine. We've got arms that can feed through the shoulders into the spine, and the head, of course, that is connected between the shoulder blades. So can we just slide the right shoulder blade up towards the ear and then down the back of the body. So we can use the shoulder blade to our advantage because it can glide through tissues. So we want that shoulder blade just to slide up towards the ear and then down as far as it can go, and just noticing where there might be sticky bits in there. And then we can take that over to the left side. And the two sides might be different, but just sliding the left shoulder blade up and then back down and just noticing the range. Now, for those of us that are very, very flexible, we want that to be within an optimum range. We don't want it to be too far. So just noticing where the point is where it's useful for the shoulder blade to move around. And we start to free the shoulder blades from the back of the body. So a lot of the time, shoulder blades are a little bit pinned on the back of the body. And when that happens, it starts to load on the low spine. So we just want to get that slide and glide happening. And then just finding the index finger knuckle, behind the index finger knuckle, we're going to pull that down into the ground. And then the middle finger knuckle, pull that down into the ground, and that will start to take us out of the wrists into the centre part of the hand, but that also takes the ribs up towards the sky. So we're separating the ribs on the shoulder blades on the back of the body and letting the ribs just float up as far as they would like to go, and then without the arms changing, so we're not bending the arms, we're bringing the shoulder blades together on the back of the body, and the ribs will drop down towards the ground. Notice what's happening in the collarbones. Maybe it's a little bit stiff and a bit sticky in the collarbones, so just let them be soft. Can we move the ribs independently of the collarbones and the shoulder blades? That's the question. And there might be one side that's a little bit more compliant and one side not so much, but as we start to feel that everything frees up. Now, if this becomes too hard on the hands, we can just take the sit bones back, bring the elbows down into the ground, just rest the hands for a minute and give them a shake out. And then come back in. And we can start the process again. So just having a play with that. Hello, Pam.
Can you just talk through that bit again?
Yeah, of course.
I've got the up and down.
Yeah.
Are you sort of, is it sort of a sinking and a coming up?
Yeah, that's right. We tend to have, we're a little bit blocky here, and we bend at the elbows to create the movement backwards and forwards. But we've got another range of movement available to us where we can lift the ribs and bring the ribs through. So we're looking at this horseshoe clip, if you like, of the collarbone and the shoulder blade, because the collarbone and the scapula are pinned together at the chromium process, which is at the top of the shoulder here. And the ribs are actually free floating underneath, although for most of us we overwork the elbows and the shoulder blade's a little bit stuck on the back. So it's a learnt, hang on, where's my imaginary wall? It's a learnt behaviour where we start to move. If I put my arms nice and straight, the arms don't actually change. It's a movement of the chest between those horseshoe clips. Does that make sense? You might find it's a bit snug here, or you might find it's a bit snug. And generally, the muscles in between the shoulder blades sometimes can be a little bit immature, a little bit inactive, because we want the rhomboids to contract and pull the shoulder blades together on the back of the body. We want them to release and let the shoulder blades go round the body. But for a lot of us, if we're desk sitters, the rhomboids, these angel sort of wings on the back, if you like, or what's left of what used to be wings for us, are generally a little bit too long and too tight because we're sort of, we're here. Don't know why I use my keyboard like Ralph off the Muppets, but there you are. I definitely type like this. So can we allow those muscles to contract, and that brings the chest up, and then what that does is that lengthens the low spine at the same time. Does that help? It might take the brain a moment to catch up with it because it's not a movement that we practice that much. As I say, if the shoulder blade and the ribs don't want to, the elbow can and the wrist can. So if something doesn't move, something else can. And we tend to become very dependent on the joints. Yeah, it looks good. It's coming. The brain's just like, what are we doing today?
They're broadening.
Yeah.
They're broadening at the back of the...
Yeah. So shoulder blades, if we go this way, shoulder blades go round and we lift, and then shoulder blades go together and we can drop. Yeah. Because we've got this, we will get into this in a workshop at some point, but we've got this kind of elliptical shape available to us within the shoulders here. That's where the head, appears from. Yeah, this is good. So finding our way back into, Pam, you can do one more. Finding our way back into our child pose, just taking the sit bones back. And again, we don't want to close the joint on the front of the hip if we can help it. So when we're sliding back, it's like the sit bones are being pulled back towards the wall behind you. So we're sliding the pelvis back on the runners at the top of the legs, and we're sliding the chest back on the runners at the top of the arms. So we feel that the tummy is supporting the spine, and we keep the tail high. And then this means that we keep the curves of the curves of the spine are intact rather than tilting, tucking the tail under and just falling back. So we've got space at the front of the hip, we've got space in the back of the knee. And then if we just pull the hands down into the ground, we can walk the fingers forwards a little bit, as long as that doesn't take the arms out of the shoulder sockets. We want them to draw the ribs forwards at the same time. We go in the two directions at once, with the low spine and the tail going back, and the ribs and the head and the arms going forwards, and just brings us into a very active type of child pose. And we just feel that between the back of the head and the back of the pelvis, we've got this lovely drawing long of the spine. And then the hands pulling down into the ground can just bring us back to center. And we were going to do something really great, and I've forgotten what it was. It's gone completely out of my head. I shall have a think. We would do something else in the meantime. Brain. So we're just going to tuck the toes under and make some nice circles with the heel. And again, just softening through the centre part of the foot. And always a great thing to do if you have got hitches and glitches in the low spine, do get your foot on a tennis ball or on a golf ball, gently if it's a golf ball. But just starting to soften through the centre part of the foot. So when we make circles with the heel and the toes down into the ground, it's just nice to feel that centre part of the foot can start to soften and open, and that directly affects the hips. So we're just bringing the feet, or starting to bring the feet down into the ground. We can take the heels back towards the wall behind you. Sit bones get drawn back, and depending on how the knees feel will depend on how far we get with this one. But we're just working with circle of the heel. So the front of the ankle becomes nice and soft, the back of the knee becomes soft, and we've got space into the hip. So with the sit bones are always drawing back. So as the heel starts to come down towards the ground, you might find that there's a space that starts to open up in the hip, and we start to feel that the tummy draws back, and there's a spaciousness in the low spine. It does go towards squat pose, but before you freak out and we don't want to go there, that's fine. Squat pose might be available to you. If it's not, just keep your hands on the ground. Just keep working with this. The more space we've got in the hip, the easier it is for the low spine. So again, we're keeping the tail nice and high again. Notice those points where the tail likes to tuck under, or we start to round through the back. Can we leave the low spine alone with this and just start to allow, I'm going to go round this way, just start to allow a spaciousness to open up between the toes and the ankle, so we get a length to the foot. And we want that to start to happen, because when that starts to happen, then for those of us who are a little bit further along in the journey, maybe the hands start to walk back and the head will lift, the chest will lift, and we start to get lifting out of the waist, and our squat pose starts to arrive there. For those of us that are very flexible, you know who you are. We don't just want to collapse back into our squat pose. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. So we want a squat pose with integrity. So can we have a nice lift up out of the ribs? Keep the ribs pulling up out of the waist. Keep your head high. We don't really need to look where we're going. And let the feet just connect into the ground. And like I say, maybe our squat pose starts to appear there. When it's enough, we're just going to come up to standing in whatever way is comfortable for you. If you're coming up through your squat pose, or if you're stepping through, whatever feels nice. And we just finding the feet. So just letting the toes spread behind the balls of the feet. And just feeling that the back of the pelvis can come back over the top of the feet. Can we allow the centre part of the foot to work for its living. And again, we can feel that the sit bones can just lift ever so slightly. If it's nice to bring the hands onto the back of the pelvis, then you can just let the weight of the hands rest there. And just, you know, we want to keep reinforcing these ideas to our brain. Your sacrum, the keystone in the back of your pelvis, is a roof. It's not a back wall. And for a lot of us, you know, we've got a sacrum that's a little bit like a back wall. It's a little bit tucked under. So can we invite the sacrum into the low spine? Can we feel that the low spine can start to lift? And that takes everything up into the underside of the ribs and starts to give us a nice bit of some length and upward lift there. And this gives us space to the low spine without trying to pull it long. So what we find with the lumbers is that, you know, if it feels grouchy, we try to pull it even longer than it already is. And the trick is to go in to come out, if that makes sense. So we bring the sacrum, invite the sacrum into the low spine, and then the low spine can lift into the underside of the diaphragm. So we get a lengthening of a different sort. It's a supported lift from the inside front of the spine. And we feel that the legs can start to hang down from the underside of the ribs, which is useful. So can we find the right foot down into the ground? Notice if actually let's go back a step. So notice if one side is pulling harder into the ground than the other, and can we make them equal? And this wants to be a daily practice. It's why it's called teeth cleaning pose. If we've got a tendency to stand more heavily in one side than the other, can we make this a daily practice to be, you know, to level stuff out, particularly for those of us that have had interventions? Can we, you know, the body has a tendency to pull it because of scar tissue. The body has a tendency to pull itself back into old habits. So can we just unwind those as part of a daily routine? So if we take the right foot and we're just going to pull that down into the ground, we're going to make that heavier. The more we pull the foot down into the ground, the more space we get into the ankle. There's an upward lift and a spaciousness that happens in the ankle. The back of the knee starts to get pulled open and the front of the hip starts to get pulled open. We get this nice lift into the underside of the ribs. If it's good to get the hands in there, if your brain is in there going, I have no clue what this woman is talking about, then get your hands in there and have one hand on the front of the ribs and one hand on the front of the hip, and we're just separating in two different directions. And this helps the tummy muscles to fire. Hello, Ronnie.
So sorry, so we're pulling down on the right side, but you're doing whatever you just said on the left side, yeah?
No. It's all on the right side. Am I pressing on? I'm probably pressing on your left, aren't I? So, yeah. Right foot gets pulled down into the ground.
Yeah.
And then right ribs are lifting.
Okay.
Right thing. So it's just like Philip. It's just like Philip. So we've got Philip's gravity button. He falls down. So as we've got the gravity button under the right foot and we get that gravity button, we pull it down into the ground. The fascial structures, those elastic structures inside you fire, and we get this pull, 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 pull. And you can see Philip doesn't have to lever himself off the green grass up towards the sky because his connective tissue body does it for him. So this is our tennis ball analogy. We've got the snooker ball here or tennis ball here and pull that down into the ground. The bounce is back up through the system. There's a reciprocal lift that gives us space all the way through. And lifts and lifts and lifts. And what you'll find is that the left foot will start to become free from the floor. This is where balance comes from. We want this because your balance comes from the central core system, deep within the solar plexus and the inside front of the low spine. We want all of those things to pull us up, and that happens because of our gravity button underneath. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
It's an interesting one because when we think of balance, because we all did it as kids, you know, when we think of balance, it's and we brace a load of muscles to hold ourselves there. But actually, when we think about integrated balance, when we're pulling down with our gravity button, we find that the foot comes off the floor, but we don't, there's adjustments happening in the muscles. And so we might have a little bit of a wobble around, and that's fine, because as the muscles find themselves, there's a deep strength here. So bracing muscles gives us a false sense of stability. But when we allow the muscles to all be at their appropriate length and their appropriate strength, change over sides if you haven't already, then when we're allowing everybody to be at their appropriate length and their appropriate strength, once the wobbles have gone, when we stay here long enough, once the wobbles have wandered off, those micro adjustments have wandered off, then we've got a real bedrock of strength and stability here. And these are skills for life, because if we have a bit of a wobble in the street, if we put our foot on something that isn't stable, that sort of stuff, then this makes the difference between, you know, a big silly wobble and, you know, actually falling over. And of course in later life we want to not do that so much. So the foot gets super active, and of course the sole of the foot is talking to the low spine all the time. So we want to feel that the legs can hang down from the underside of the ribs here, and that gives a nice spaciousness to the low spine as well. So hopefully we've done both sides. So we're just going to bring the hands onto the front of the thighs. If you have your chair to hand, I know Ronnie has to go upstairs to get her chair, so if you haven't got your chair to hand, it's fine. You can have your hands on the front of the thighs. But if you do have your foldy chair to hand, then you can pop your hands on the back of your chair. So from here, we bring the hands onto the front of the thighs, remembering that the arms are always feeding back through the, whatever these things are called, shoulders, into the spine, gives us a nice length. So whether the hands are on the thighs or whether they're on the back of the chair, it doesn't matter. We're feeding back through. We've got this nice lift in the sit bones. We've got this nice pull down with the feet. So again, can we just feel that we're starting to extend the ribby spine up into the underside of the head? We get this lovely lengthening that's happening. And then we just feel that the sit bones can just unbutton from the top of the legs. And we feel, just like we were doing in our square pose, that the sit bones just get pulled back towards the wall behind you. Now, wherever the hands are there to support you. So we want to get the feedback from whatever surface they're pressing into. We want to get that feedback. We've got the gravity button that pulls down and the arm that pulls back through the socket into the ribs and keeps that lightness, lifting and spaciousness. So we start to move in the two directions at once. So sit bones go back towards the wall behind you. Again, we've got that pull down through the feet, so the backs of the knees start to open. We've got space in the front of the hip. And we start to come forwards into something that we would call our forward bend. We want to be softening into the back of the... my anatomy seems to have left me this morning. Into the back of the leg. So when we've got hitches and glitches in the low spine, generally the hamstrings will take the weight. So can we make space into the backs of the legs there? If it's tight in the back of the knee and the back of the hamstring, just making those little circles with the heel again. Circles with your heels just helps to soften the calves, tells the hamstrings that it's okay to stand down a little bit. They tend to be the soldiers of the body. They're always working quite hard in the back of the body for us. So can we just keep feeling that the tail can lift away and the feet can pull down into the ground? And we just keep following that, really. It's a real exploratory pose when we take the name away from what this is. We lose any idea of going forwards and bending and all of that stuff. Can we just keep feeding the limbs back to the spine? It's looking really good, Margaret. Looking good. So let the jaw into the back of the head, Ronnie. Let the nose back in. Right, go back to the beginning of our session. Eyes can soften back, nose and jaw. So we've got that lovely lengthening happening into the neck. Fabi, you're doing great. We are into some deep stuff this morning. And again, they're your exploratory movements, so come in and out of them as much as you want to or you need to. Pam, it looks much better through the arms. This is good. Yeah, it's good head alignment, Sarah Jane. So let the knuckles fold over the back of the chair, Ronnie. That's it, take them that way, and then they will pull your ribs forwards and open up into the underside of the arm and give you more space. Yes, exactly that. You feel that ripple effect comes through. I don't know if you feel it, but I can see it. It goes through into the crown of the head, whoop, and then the low spine is allowed then to go in the other directions. It's challenging because we do run into the hamstrings and the backs of the knees at one point. Very used to the back of the pelvis being close coupled to the top of the legs, and creating space there is work. This is good. So we're going to walk back to our chairs or back up into centre, and we're just going to take hold. You know, we've got this thumb. Actually, I'm going to do this because it's Fabi's first class this morning, so welcome you. So we're just placing our thumb in the squashy bit between index finger and thumb, and then the other index finger, we're just joining them together, because when we get hold of this index finger, the root of the index finger here, it creates a loop that the arms can feed back through the shoulders, through the ribs, through the spine, and we start to get this singular connection that comes through the hands and through the ribs, which is a lovely, lovely thing. So can we, when we've got this, just start to float the arms up over the head? And the reason that we want to hold with the index finger here is that we get a good grip between one hand and the other, so that when the arms float up, we've got space into the underarm and we've got this lovely connection through the solar plexus. So when arms come up over the head, the tendency is that we've got this, but when we hold the index finger and we draw the arms up over the head, we get a length out of the solar plexus and the waist, and it's just a slightly different muscle firing sequence through the shoulder girdle, if you like. So from here, can we just make, I just realised my screen has lost my arms out the top of the screen. Can we just make some nice circly movements here? We might find that it's a little bit stiff and a little bit sticky into the underarms, but we want this. We want some nice space here. And we feel that the legs start to just hang down from the underside of the ribs. And this whole kind of reworking in the brain that the body is hanging down from the underside of the skull. The spine hangs down from the underside of the skull in space, rather than us being pushed down into the ground by gravity. We're going to let go. Make sure that there's nothing around you that's going to go flying, but giving the arms a nice wave. We're going to grab the other hand, just on your favourite. So we're going to grab the other hand and just coming up through centre. and making circles. Just in the opposite direction, if you can remember the direction that you went in. And again, it's just noticing those sticky bits. And allowing that spaciousness to happen into the underarms. Can we allow every rib to have its own space? Can we allow space at the side of the neck and the top of the shoulders, which just lets the pelvis hang from the low spine? And relaxing if you haven't already listened to your body on this one. It is challenging for shoulders. Initially we feel it quite heavily up in here, but over time we start to rework it back into spine, back into the centre of body. This is good. So we're just going to come down to sitting. If you want to sit on your chair, you can sit on your chair. If you're happy to sit on the ground, you can sit on the ground. You find what's right for you. With regards to sitting, have your cushion behind the sit bones. If that feels good for you, we tend to find that pelvises are happy to roll under, particularly if we sit at the desk for long periods. We tend to sit on the back of the pelvis and then the spine goes long. So can we find the sit bones, pull those down into the ground. Again, we're inviting the sacrum into the low spine. Doesn't matter where your legs are, they can be out in front, they can be crossed, whatever feels good for you. Because we're really interested in how the pelvis is on the ground. So we feel that as the sit bones can pull down, we sort of, we've got that lift of the back of the pelvis into the low spine, and we feel that there's a low spine curve that starts to happen there. The ribs can come back into the spine on the front, and the jaw can come back into the spine. So we've kind of got these two component parts drawing back into the spine, and then the pelvis is allowed to realign itself. So can we still feel that quality of the legs hanging down from the underside of the ribs and the underside of the waist? And again, we're just going to take the thumbs just around the back of the skull. We've got these lovely thumbs into the underside of the back of the skull. We've got lovely long neck that starts to happen again. And we can just pull, if the legs are crossed, we can just pull the edges of the feet down into the ground. If the legs are out in front of you, can we pull the heels down into the ground? That's good, Sarah Jane. So a little bit more activity through the big toes. Yeah. And if we've got the legs in, then we can just pull, again, long little toe side comes down into the ground. Oh, you can feel it affecting the sort of, deep inside the pelvic bowl. So the legs are pulling the pelvis and the low spine down, and the thumbs and the head just pulling the spine up. So we're going in the two directions at once. And just noticing the breath at the solar plexus. Can we breathe broad into the base of the ribs? And as the breath out leaves, the ribs can soften back and just relax all around the shoulders. This is good. Bringing hands down. We're just going to take the right hand onto the left knee or somewhere in the direction of that, and the other hand behind you, and just taking a really gentle, nice twist, keeping the nose towards the knuckles of the hands. The head is always so happy to go around the corner, and the rest of the body just gets left behind. So can we feel ribs rotating first? Shoulder blades and collarbones broadening. So it's very much a centre of the body movement, and then the head gets involved at the very, very last. We're going to come back to centre. We're going to change over sides. One side always different to the other, so just using the hand connection to the leg to feed the legs back through the pelvis. Using the hand connection on the knee to feed the arm back through the shoulders to the spine. We're always looking to feed the limbs back to the spine. And then coming back to the centre, giving the shoulders a nice roll. And if it's nice to come down to laying just for a moment, just to rest. If you're happy sitting, you can stay sitting. But if you want to come back down to laying with the knees bent, soles of the feet into the ground, and just taking a moment just to notice how your body feels from when you started. So the breath like waves that roll up the beach. So that lovely in-breath that just washes up the inside of the body. It's expansive. And it's softening, and it's broadening, and it's all of the things. And the breath out. Just like the waves going back to that body of water, there's a heaviness, there's a pull to that body of water. When the wave goes back to the ocean, you can see that it's drawn back. And so are we, and we get drawn back into the pull of the earth. And we're just going to give the fingers and toes a wiggle. And making some nice rotations with the wrists and the ankles. And taking the arms up over the head and the legs long for a nice stretch through the body. And bringing the knees up to the chest, giving the knees a nice hug. And having a little rock from side to side, coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. Or returning yourself back to sitting in your own time. Good. You've worked hard today, lovely, so go gently with yourself. It's been a pleasure as always. That's good. Goodbye from me and goodbye from this one. There's cats all over the screen this morning. Cats everywhere. We've got matchy cats.